In this series, we will be discussing specific examples of design techniques that make a positive difference for people living with certain human conditions.
The more a designer understands the client and/or the community, the more effective and respectful the design will be.
Welcome to Inclusive Designers Podcast. I'm your host, Janet Roach.
And I'm your moderator, Carolyn Robbins.
We have a lovely show for everyone today. We will be discussing the benefits of urban planning with an inclusive focus. We'll also explore the barriers that exist every day in terms of accessibility when designing buildings that meet employees' needs, from the outside on the street to the entrances and all the spaces within.
Like kitchens, conference rooms, and of course, bathrooms, to name just a few.
We are honored to have not one, but two dynamic guests with us today, Meg O'Connell and Steve Wright, to talk about designing for disabilities in the workplace and beyond.
Before we hear from them directly, let me tell you a little more about our guests. Steve Wright primarily calls himself a storyteller, which he is, but he is also an educator, award-winning journalist, and advocate for positive change. He has presented on universal design issues and solutions at national conferences and advises clients on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility.
In all these roles, his goal is to create a better built environment with a focus on inclusion, dignity, and non-segregating design for people with disabilities.
And we are also delighted that Meg O'Connell is joining us. She is the CEO and founder of Global Disability Inclusion. Meg is an award-winning disability inclusion expert who provides strategic direction, design, and implementation of disability employment and inclusion programs. Her clients include Global 500 companies, including some of the world's most recognized brands, plus foundations, universities, and nonprofits.
Meg is also involved in disability employee research. She co-authored The State of Disability Employee Engagement to help companies understand the workplace experiences of their employees with disabilities.
I think you can see why we're so excited to get their views on this topic. Steve and Meg will share their pet peeves and advice on what designers can do to design it right the first time.
I wanted to have them on together because they both had a lot to say about urban design and workplace challenges for disabilities, but from their own perspectives.
We think you'll agree. And with that, here's our interview with Meg O'Connell and Steve Wright.
Hi, and welcome to Inclusive Designers. I'm your host, Janet Roach, and with me today, I have Steve Wright and Meg O'Connell. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm great.
Yeah, great to be among friends old and new and just sharing lots of practical advice to good folks.
Great, thank you. It's more of a natural conversation as opposed to a specific set of questions. So let's just dive right on in. I noticed that you guys have a lot of different hands on a lot of different pots. We could talk about that, maybe talking a little bit more about universal inclusion within urban settings.
Yeah, but certainly let's definitely try to steer things because, Meg's expertise is, employment and training and inclusion on that end. And let's be honest, it's no exaggeration. There's 10 different databases or stats from Fed, et cetera, that show that people with disabilities are still under and unemployed compared to education or ability. It's not the underlying disability, which most of the regular world thinks. It's a lot of times the filling the gaps. Is there accessible housing? Is there accessible transportation? Can you cross the street safely?
Right.
So it all, to me, it all folds together pretty well.
Yeah, right. So of the two of you, is there anything you'd like to promote on the show? Meg, is there something that you would like to touch on and let our listeners know?
Yeah, and I think Steve mentioned it. The bulk of the work that we do is with companies and creating accessible and inclusive work environments. So when Steve talks about urban planning, it's getting around in our cities and streets. And for me, it's access in our buildings where people are employed.
Mm-hmm.
And do we have the right universal design concepts in most buildings? The answer is no.
No.
To ensure that the space is open and available to everyone. And ultimately, that's what we want. We want environments that work for everybody. And we don't have to have special considerations or accommodations made because they're already built into the environment.
Right.
Yeah. in terms of universal design, right? So maybe we could talk about the idea of what I saw in both of your postings in Miami. By the way, just for the listeners, love Miami. Miami's amazing. Miami's great, especially in terms of architecture, too,
Right.
right? Like some of the Art Deco areas, just incredible. But there was a particular building that you both had kind of pointed to, which was the health services building right there in Miami.
Yeah.
And Steve, you actually went there and documented it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Sure. And again, just, to me, universal design, I should give credit. The person that founded that is a fellow by the name of the late Ron Mace. He's passed away. He was a post-polio person, brilliant fellow at the American Institute of Architects, brilliant person. Wish I could have collaborated with him. But, I think it's really well worth it for every listener to understand that, he probably could have called it fella in a wheelchair design or disability community design, but he picked universal. As a marketer, I praise that, but I think it showed that, getting around, being able to cross a crosswalk safely, whether it's grandmother who's slower walker but doesn't use a wheelchair and doesn't view herself as officially disabled,
Right.
whether it's small children, I even wonder why we have these 30-second crossings instead of 45-second.
Right.
Because if a little 8-year-old starts to dart back, you're stranded, and there comes a wave of 3 lanes of sedans plowing at you.
Right. Ready to plow you over. Yeah, actually, I just saw it this weekend too. New York City, Fifth Avenue. As soon as their feet are kind of touching the ground on the street, like you can see the thing starting to blink already. And then there's a whole panic, right?
Right.
And this kid is on one of those little razor scooters and poof, literally right in the middle of the road. And we're down to like 5 seconds.
Right. Right.
And the kid is sprawled out, I mean, thank God the kid was okay, but
Right.
and meanwhile, I'm trying to get my father, my 88-year-old father, across the street on the other direction. And he's decided because the little ramp that they have there was all torn up and he didn't like it. So he's now going out into the traffic and around the bend in order to get back on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just to your point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You could almost call it welcoming design or comfortable design.
Right.
And unfortunately, there are some architects and planners and engineers that push back and feel like, well, we didn't do this when I was growing up. Why now? And I always point out, it's comfortable. It's not like it's some special interest. Yes, certainly if there's not a ramp, a person with a wheelchair can't get in most likely, and they do not want to be carried because their mobility device is an extension of their body. So it'd almost be like grabbing you by the rear end and the throat to carry you up the steps. But yeah, but again, it's just, I don't think Michael Phelps from the Olympic won all his medal. I don't think anybody that all of a sudden ballooned up to 500 pounds because there were curb ramps or safer crosswalks or wider sidewalks or buildings that had welcoming entrances. It's just this, I like healthy design, but there's almost like this mythology that if we build it accessible, we somehow cut off exercise, which is kind of silly.
Really?
Mm.
Well, and I think, Steve, to your point, the flip side is the aesthetics.
Yeah.
Architects are really proud of what they design and interesting features, and they're afraid putting a wheelchair ramp in the front of the building instead of behind the building will somehow take away from the appeal of what the building looks like.
Right.
The aesthetics.
The aesthetics of the building.
Right.
And universal design marries design and function.
Right.
So the challenge really for architects is how do you create something that's beautiful that is also accessible?
Correct.
And the most people possible have access to enter your fabulous building that you've created.
Right.
Or even the boring office building you've created.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you are so correct. And I have seen mosaic tiles. I've seen plexiglass that you see through. I don't want to be mean at all to my brethren, but if you think you can only build the Spanish Steps or some replica of it and everything else is second class,
right,
or VA hospital and smells bad and is dated and all has to be painted gray and ugly, you're not a good designer.
Yeah.
I mean, again, forgive me for riffing, but here in Florida, we have sea level rise issues and and hurricanes and horrible stuff. Yeah, every building here, even the retrofitting the older ones, you better be out of the floodplain. You better be resilient for even no-name storms that are going to dump a ton of water.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might alter what they did 80 years ago. That doesn't make every one of those buildings poisoned and terrible. And we were talking before we went about the cold of the north and the heat of the south. So, there are ancient buildings that were built before air conditioning. Now you've retrofitted. Nobody says, oh my God, it's so horrible because there's a compressor on the roof. So,
Right. Those are excellent points, Steve. I love that. I mean, it's very simple, right? We do that all the time.
yeah, design is fluid.
Right. Yeah.
Totally. And Steve, I know you and I have talked about this. Steve and I are both in different parts of Florida.
Yeah.
And Florida's the, retirement capital. Arizona's coming up strong behind us. So the retirement capital of the United States, less than 1% of the homes are built for accessibility.
Right.
So you have an aging population that are building houses and they don't know any better. They're not thinking 20 years from now, I'm not going to be able to use the stairs.
Right.
They're thinking, I'm 60, I'm retired, I'm going to move near the beach. And our builders aren't thinking about it.
Right.
And my husband and I live in an older home and we're likely going to tear down at some point. We've started talking to builders. And every time I talk to a builder and say, this is our aging in place home, we're going nowhere else after this. We have to talk about universal design concepts. 3 builders. What's that?
Wow.
Right. Right.
Do you mean ADA? No, I mean better than ADA. And they just don't know.
Wow.
Yeah. Boy, you really throw out a perfect point, Meg.
Yeah.
Because there's so many contractors and architects that they, even when you tell them what you want, they want to push back.
Mm-hmm.
I did an interview within my past year or two. There's a woman by the name of Patricia Belmont. I believe she's in the Texas area. And Belmont Senior Living is, I wish I had 1/100th of her pocketbook because I think she's become very wealthy building senior housing. And very interestingly, there's 2 things. Instead of that idea of building in the middle of nowhere with cheaper land, she's building vertically. Now it is in major cities, but like the one in Miami, it's going to have a health system connected right to it, so you can have your urgent care and checkups, and it's right by a rail station, which sometimes people say, oh, that's so urban and frightening, but people want to get on the train and they're recognized that maybe in their mid-70s they might not be good at driving, or they might already have low vision.
Right.
And the other thing she told me that her marketing and design people said, oh, people don't want to think of disability even if it's around the corner. They want to be healthy. When you sell these communities that charge $5,000-6,000 a month, you want it to be sexy and you're pretending you're 38 years old or what have you, even if the client's 68. And they built tub showers. And they had some folks with some falls. And I'm sorry, it was sort of like, the A wing had walk-in, roll-in, and the B wing had tub showers. And when people started seeing the ease of transfer and the ability to just walk, and they had rainforest shower head. Again, it wasn't VHI hospital substandard, hadn't been upgraded since the 40s or something. It was sexy. It looked like an A-loft hotel or some cool thing. So they ended up, they spent money.
To make money.
Yeah.
But to make money and to make their residents happy and to have them stay.
Yeah, right.
And therefore, with them staying, then the prices go up.
Right.
Because it's a desired area, desired neighborhood, desired building to go into.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm with you all the way on all of that. And it's such an important piece. And I actually saw this old house and they were showing an accessibility house. And I crossed my arms and said, okay, show me. Do you know what I mean? I knew very well there were going to be issues. There were, but there were very few. And it was a very sleek and modern building.
Yeah.
It had a beautiful facade that you would never even know that there was a ramp there, and their daughter wasn't necessarily in a wheelchair at that time, but they still put in an elevator. They put in a curbless shower for her. Again, there were a few details I think could have been changed. And maybe they would be at some point, or an easy retrofit at some point if she is in a wheelchair. But, I'd probably try to contact him at some point because I think he's a local guy. He did a really nice job. And that's not always the case. And Meg, I'll tell you, it really blows my mind that none of the contract in Florida wouldn't know, what does it take? Maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago? Okay.
Yeah,
It was just kind of burgeoning, but I feel like now that's a little it's frightening.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and what ends up happening is what nobody wants, right? You have to leave your home when you need care.
Yeah.
You can't bring the care into your home because it's not accessible for you to get into a bathroom if now you're using a wheelchair or a walker. Your doorways aren't wide enough.
Mm.
And so, if you need additional support, even if it's temporarily, maybe due to a fall or something that's longer term, a serious illness, you're going to be forced to leave your home because it's not accessible.
Right.
And we all know some of those facilities are great, but the majority of them are not.
Right.
And nobody wants to be in any of those places.
Um,
Right. And I'll also take a step further with that because then now you're taking the generational wealth out of your family, right?
yeah.
That nest egg that you built for the house, within the house, now gone, and you'll have to, I mean, unless you've done some super planning,
Oh,
but sometimes these things happen like this.
right.
And you will have to go sell your house and then give the money to the people that are taking care of you,
Correct.
and instead of your children, your descendants, who that's their inheritance that then they can't get a leg up on.
Yeah, it's true.
And there's so many simple solutions, even just like a barn door, which, you pick up a design, whether it's a real high or a mainstream design, those are all sexy and cool. And, just having one of those for your kitchen. But, if they're mounted right, you can almost move those with a little finger. And that might replace the swinging door with the hinges because sometimes those 3 inches of hinges block the wheelchair or block the assistive mobility device.
Right.
I've even seen switching over to Meg with what she's done with clients for helping people self-declare and, getting good employees to be great employees because they're comfortable with the accommodation they need. But even a conference room that has a wider entrance or isn't clogged with furniture,
Right.
you know, heaven help the person who thought, oh, disabled people are only a charity case. And then your client rolls in a chair and they're the richest person from Colombia, but they leave miffed because they couldn't get around or they went down the hall to an inaccessible restroom. You're not going to get the commission from them. I don't care whether you design widgets or you're a big four accounting firm. You're not. So if you want to take it then from there, my friend.
Right. Or at the least, you're going to be extremely embarrassed.
Yeah.
I think the clogging of the accessible bathroom as storage
Yeah.
is always one of my favorite. And it's not necessarily a design faux pas, but it's just people going, "Oh, look at this big room. You know what? We should put paper in here.
Yeah.
We should put paper and extra chairs in here, right? And maybe a table or two."
Oh, yeah.
Well, and years ago, this is going back decades, I worked for a regional bank and we had an employee who was a wheelchair user, obviously looking to use the accessible stall. And time again, he would go in and there'd be other employees in there reading the newspaper in the larger stall while they did their business. And so, HR sent out several notes, please be respectful, don't do this. So, and then, of course, people were still doing it. So then we had to put a lock on it.
Oh, geez.
And only the employee with the wheelchair had the key,
Had the key.
or the janitor.
Um,
So it's just about being respectful to the accessibility components that are in place
yeah.
and not using the stalls if you don't need them because it's roomier and you have a little bit more room for you and your suitcase and your purse or whatever else. I mean, we've all been guilty of it, right?
I was going to say, guilty is charged, right?
Yeah. But, don't do it,
Right.
Don't do it. I know. Well, but that goes back to also designing bathrooms correctly, right?
Right.
Like just in terms of universal design. And I love even Europeans when they get to the United States, there's even like a little bit of a gap between the sidebar and the actual door. And they're like, but you can see people in there. And it never even occurred to me until somebody had pointed that out. Because Europeans have more of a connected, like overlapping piece of the door.
Mm.
So, but we don't even design those bathrooms correctly. Don't even get me started on women. The lack of the amount of bathrooms for women as opposed to like, it's even. It's like, okay, but we got other things to do.
Yep.
You bring up a great point, Jenny. It makes you wonder. Like you go to an airport, MIA is like a city within a city, Miami International Airport,
It's huge, right? Yeah.
and there's a lot of dead space there, and it just makes you wonder as you're retrofitting, why not make 13 stalls that are all the universal design ones? So then if it is the privileged feeling business person with a maybe now I understand, if it's a really old historic building with a small floor plate, you might be doing flips and twists to fit it.
Right, right.
But when it's something the size of feels like 20 football fields,
Yeah.
and by the same token, forgive me, this is one of my pet peeves. I'll go to it because I'm kind of an activist, and I'll go to a meeting, and in the morning, they'll say, "Dear Madam Mayor or Madam City Manager, we have immigrants and we have school kids in the summer, and I don't care if it's find $4 million in the budget and we'll push a pile of sand from one end of the tennis court to the other for make work jobs because we have people that need a job."
Right.
Kind of an honorable thing.
Right.
I'll go in the afternoon and say, "Hey, why don't you bid 3 of those 4 million towards contracting for inclusion, hire local, because a lot of the labor can be doing it, and a disabled person could be writing up who did the labor or tracking it so it could be inclusive." And they look at me like I just switched to a language that was unintelligible. And you're thinking, wait a minute, at 10 a.m. you're ready to pay $5 million to push a load of sand from one end to the other. Surely you could tweak this thing and do, connect some of your sidewalks, build things that are more inclusive. I'm not that bright, I don't have to go to the Ivy League to come up with that answer. So why can't you plug that in? It's just weird.
Right. Well, one would think we're still working on it, Steve, as you will know, and you guys are working really hard to make some of those changes possible. So, I mean, it's, you talk about a pet peeve. I have a lot of pet peeves, and they're usually around inclusive design. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about your pet peeves in terms of inclusive design and what people have done? They like, hey, look, here's like the cutout for the sidewalk. It goes in the middle of the crosswalk in the street, but here you go.
Well, I've got an all-time one, and I checked. It's in all 50 state building codes, and I'm not saying nothing's an absolute, right? I mean, just like we said, there may be a historic property or very old building you want to save with a small floor plate.
Right.
So it's not like it's across the board, but the company someday will probably sue me. I'll open up my mail and get some ding letter, but
cease and assist.
limited use, limited access lifts. And again, maybe that's a little bit inside baseball for some listeners, but they're sort of those outdoor elevators. They're very small, and I've yet to see one that's not key operated. Well, you think about it, is it the doorman? Is it the janitor? The key goes missing within 6 weeks of it being deployed, and they tend to be used in very urban areas. And unfortunately, like South Beach, if there's something like that, it becomes where the beer bottles get thrown, or where, someone uses it as a de facto bathroom when they're 3 sheets to the wind.
No.
And it happens, and you can't use it, and it's the only way of getting in. So you might have built a mixed use thing with 20 restaurants and 10 bars and everything. Basically, you might as well just fly an airplane over with one of those trailing ads on the beach saying, we intentionally discriminate against people with disabilities with mobility issues, because it's not going to work. I talk to architects and I say, well, why do you do this? And they said, well, it's in the code and it passed inspection.
Yeah.
And I said, but I'm a living, breathing person telling you it's going to fail. Would you, if you built a roof for a skyscraper out of laminated cardboard and somehow it kept the rain out on inspection day and passed, would you go home knowing the roof is going to cave in on your 38-story building and say, ha ha?
Oh, well.
We passed at noon when the inspector...
We passed the code, right?
Yeah, the inspector waddled over for 20 minutes at noon on March. It's good. No, because your clients would shoot you. So why, again... Maybe I'm just feeling like those kinds of lifts should be by a variance where you'd have to prove that it's a super narrow lot and it's a tight lot. And I think some designers put it in because I'm guessing a little turn ramp doesn't have a big markup. If you sell them 3 $6,000 lifts, you probably mark it up. I hate to be so cynical, but the design firm probably puts a little markup on that, so they probably love them.
Yeah.
forgive me for rambling, and I will shut up, but Michael Graves, the late architect, very famous modernist architect, happened to get a viral infection that invaded his spinal cord and used a power wheelchair for mobility for about the last decade of his life. He taught at University of Miami, so I got to meet him. And there's literally a thing that was called Ocean Steps at the very top of world famous Ocean Drive in Miami Beach. And when he was the able-bodied multimillionaire star architect, he built 3 of those Lula lifts, which completely fell apart within about a year of being, the year is probably being generous, within a month of installation. So, you know, whether it was Starbucks coffee or the Russian caviar place, you couldn't go to them. And your families couldn't.
Yeah.
So anyway, he was one of the few people within his lifetime retrofitted and spent time building all kinds of product design with fatter handles and easier to move paddles. So he's probably one of the few that sort of got to undo his sins while he was still rolling about the earth.
It's actually really interesting. I would like to hear more about that at some point.
Yeah.
Like, because I think, to your point, it was an architect going back in and kind of scrubbing down, like you said, the sins that he had created, which sometimes you have to spend just even a little bit of time, in somebody else's, in this case, maybe a wheelchair or whatever,
Oh yeah.
just to have that ability to be like, wait a minute, maybe this isn't working.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that I've told this story before on the podcast, which is I teach over at the Boston Architectural College.
Yeah.
And not only when I was a student there getting my master's, but also when I taught, one of the best things we ever did was to take a wheelchair and go around the city of Boston. Now, I know it's controversial because, it's one of those things where like the person in the chair could go and easily stand up and take care of whatever it is they need to do.
Right.
But, there were definitely some eye openers there that were just incredible.
Right.
And I know it stuck with me. I know it stuck with the students. And we also had like the dean come with us on one of the trips, and we were trying to find the accessible way to get to the T.
Yep.
And this is the local subway system around here, in case you don't know.
Yeah.
And he could not fathom that there wasn't an accessibility at this particular train station on Mass Ave here in the Back Bay.
Yeah.
And I let him do his thing, right? I let him walk around, and he's like, well, it's got to be over here. We went into Target, got into the elevator in Target because it's over the subway. And he's like, well, you got to press the button and go down the stairs. And there was no button to press. I went with him to, you know what I mean, to go through this process, and he just couldn't imagine it. And then, it's the winter time. So now we have to walk and push the person in the wheelchair a mile to get to either train station. And this is right in the heart of Boston. And now I know that they are changing that. They've redone a whole bunch of stuff in that particular area. And part of the promissory note was for them to go and change that train station, which should include some sort of accessibility.
Yeah.
If not, I'm going to be very upset.
Mm.
But yes. But anyways, so Meg, tell me a little bit more about your experience, talk to our listeners and tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing and maybe how other designers could get involved.
Yeah, so the work that we do is primarily with companies to help them create better workplaces for people with disabilities. So that covers everything from policies, programs, procedures around inclusion at the different touch points that companies have where they engage with their employees, from recruiting to onboarding to learning and development and performance management, all of those things. And it also includes digital accessibility and physical accessibility. We have a client now who wants a physical accessibility audit. They're in a new building. They don't own the building, but they want to make sure that the 4 floors that they are on are in fact accessible, and so that they can share their expectations with the people that own the building. So we're really helping companies move to that more inclusive design in every aspect of their business. So we see it all the time where companies don't have an accommodations policy for employees that may need either different digital equipment to help them perform better at work, or just even, not thinking about, I think you mentioned it earlier, having conference rooms where there is open seating for people with wheelchairs. You're not having to move furniture around, making sure that people know how to turn on the captioning in the meetings. So, people that maybe are hard of hearing or English is their second language, or, hey, I just didn't catch what they say, but I can see it in the captions. We all watch movies with captioning on now, right?
It makes it better, right?
People are watching videos at work with the captions on, so they're not interrupting their coworkers. In some ways, we're seeing universal design components ramping up, like in the captioning example. That's gotten a whole resurgence. Captioning meetings, that became a real thing during COVID. And so we're seeing companies adopt those as standard operating practices now to be more inclusive to everybody. So that's great. We still have largely organizations thinking a person with a disability is a person in a wheelchair.
Right.
And we've kind of done that to ourselves, right?
We have.
Got the iconic wheelchair symbol everywhere.
I was gonna say the iconic wheelchair, right? Yeah.
But, 1 in 4 adults in the US has a disability.
Right.
And 80% of those are invisible disabilities. So, we tell folks, we coach both employers and employees, ask for what you need. It doesn't always have to be about your disability. Say things like, we tell folks with dyslexia all the time that don't do well with, oh, we walked in a room, we're handing out a 10-page PowerPoint deck, now we're all going to discuss it. That's not going to work for somebody with dyslexia that really wants to engage, but doesn't have the processing time. So as I need materials at least 24 hours in advance. What do you need in your workplace to make it better for you? And then as employers and managers are getting those requests, they're going to know what works better for their team. And bottom line is, it's not just the person with dyslexia. Everyone wants that PowerPoint 24 hours in advance. So they have time to read it and be prepared with questions, come into the meeting with something that's thought provoking. So we're really trying to encourage more things like that, where tell us what you need, let's accommodate you that way, and let's create better workplaces for everybody. But I think the biggest obstacle that we've been talking about is the retrofitting of buildings. We don't have folks thinking about that as much as they should. And then, things are broken all the time. The automatic manual door goes out, or I'll see signs up that say only employees who need this should use it, so as not to wear down the motor. But meanwhile, everyone wants to use it because they're bringing in, bags and suitcases and briefcases and heavy things, and they have things in their arms and hitting it with their hips so the door opens for them, so they don't have to struggle to get in. That works for everybody. It's not just about the people with disabilities. So I think for full circle, it's about how do we create universal design, meaning how do we create our spaces that work for everybody? And the workplace is an area where we really need that commitment to creating workplaces that work for everyone.
Right.
Yeah, right. A lot of people who are disabled for one reason or another might not be able to get to work or to be at work. I think there's some more grace period now because of the fact that we can Zoom and stuff like that, right?
Mhm.
So we're not as tethered to the old desk and chair and, well, for at least a good 30 years, the cubicle
Yeah.
approach that I think we probably all suffered through at some point. I know I did, but it's such an important piece, and it's also about leveling the field of equality. And so that's a really important part of all this.
Yeah.
Oh.
Steve, you want to jump in?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you hit the perfect nerve here with the leveling the playing field thought. I think we open with this image that I like to share of it's basically the Board of Health building for Miami. And a lot of the people that go to it are lower income, not everyone, but it's part of the safety net for inoculations and all kinds of ongoing care and checkups, etc. And they're all proud of it because it's a LEED gold building.
Right.
So it's got its sustainability and it's out of the floodplain. But in building out of the floodplain, what you really see from the street is the main entrance is up a grand staircase. And now there is a ramped entrance. It goes to the same lobby. I kind of fanatically check it every other month, and it is open. Because sometimes here's one of your problems. If you build a segregating entrance for your access, a lot of places lock it.
Yes.
Retail, it's very common. Restaurant, very common.
Yes.
Because, somebody's going to dine and dash.
Right.
Or, been a million stories lately about how some retail places they're the best corner in Manhattan, but they're thinking of shutting down because there's so much theft.
Right.
And nobody goes back and has the architect shaking their fist. Well, 18 years ago, we built this alternate entrance, and when you lock it, you're going to destroy it for everyone in a chair.
Right.
Or not just chair, even just a slow walker or Canadian crutches. It's much bigger than that, right? Obviously, low vision people like graded ramps rather than trying to tackle something that you may have a depth perception issue or something like that. So once again, it's much more universal than just someone in a power chair.
Right.
But again, just that when I gave a talk about that building, and I don't want to knock it, it's actually a person I know was the main designer, but just when you put that little baby sign pointing you a whole block down the street, think about back to Meg's, her bread and butter. Think if she helped coach them and do the right thing. And again, it's not charity because people with disabilities are very good at problem solving and they're incredibly resourceful because we have an environment that makes you do that. Because to get from point A to B, you get up early and plot out and you're a natural problem solver. It's a stereotype, but it's a positive one.
Right.
But anyhow, even if you're not just a visitor that gets intimidated or you're not sure where the other entrance is, think if you're a person with disability and where do you make your points with the boss to get that corner office or to go from being an entry level to project manager? You walk and roll on the way to lunch. Well, you go down your 4 stories in the elevator, you can BS with them, then you get ready to go with a couple people. And here's a little Sparky in a wheelchair. You got to go all the way down, all the way back. If it's starting to rain, you separate from the group.
Right.
You're giving all these visual cues that you're second rate or you're around the bend.
And that is a huge part of all of this as well. You bring up a good point, Steve, that also makes you feel inferior. And I mean, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And when I was telling you about that class that I did, it wasn't just the train station. I would also bring them to a coffee shop, and it was smack dab in the middle of the street. Couldn't be any more smack dab in the middle of the street. And it was downstairs, which is not uncommon around here. And it had 3 kind of zigzag steps going down. There was no lift or anything of that sort. They had the nicest looking accessibility plates I've ever seen before in my life. They were brass. They were very shiny. They were basically like pointing you to go to either side of the block, to go around the block, to go into the alley, which is what we've got here. So you've literally now had to go around the block into the alley where the garbage is kept, where the cars are kept, right? Like this were the unsightly parts of Boston. And I couldn't even believe it. They didn't even have a cutout on, because there's like a little bit of a lip between the street and the parking areas, which is fine for like a car, right? Or like you're walking a bicycle. But if you are in a wheelchair, or if you've got something large, it just doesn't work. And the last time I did it, we got to the door, the doorbell wasn't even working.
Oh, yeah.
So you've done all this, like you said, you have separated yourself from the rest of the group. You have now gone to the back of the building. You are there by yourself. Maybe it's New England. Could be raining, could be snowing, could be the heat of day, right? Only to find out that the doorbell's not working. There was a telephone. They were able to call. The person came out, just kind of flung open the door.
Oh, yeah.
And didn't even hold the door for them. It was a group of the students. They didn't know where they were going, so they got in the elevator and they ended up going up all the way up to the top floor, which was somebody's apartment apparently. So they started going to the apartment thinking that it was the coffee shop. It just kind of goes to show you, Steve, to your point, by then I would have gotten my coffee already and I would have already gone.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, yeah, it's crazy.
Absolutely.
That's why it is so important to have public transit functional. Again, all due respect to Michael Bloomberg and all those super tall buildings and saying, if we zone to the sky, we'll have money to fix the problems, And I know the MTA is not the city itself. It's like another layer of government for the transit.
Manhattan's really bad.
But yeah, as we said, not even 1 in 4 stations are wheelchair accessible. And, unless you own a helicopter, a CEO, the fastest way to get, from the Bronx to a meeting in Union Square or vice versa is that train.
Yeah.
You see millionaires riding the train because it's efficient. You can't take 4 hours into traffic. you know.
Mhm.
And then you turn around and at those 1 out of 4, half the elevators are broken on any given day.
No.
And somebody says, well, but you've got 1 out of 4. That's not bad. But, you find these weird things where the northbound train, there is the platform with the elevator, the southbound's not. So you can't really work there or live there because you can't do a 50% commute. You're not, what are you supposed to,
Stop.
get a wheelchair that has a bed inside it that, whatever, 3-in-1.
Well, I will challenge you, Steve, to design that. That actually sounds pretty handy, right?
There you go. It's like those, like the business class seats that I never get to sit in that fold out, but
Just glorified larger seats, that's all.
forgive me for if I'm rambling or riffing, but it just, we have one of the ugliest histories in our entire nation is of segregation.
Yeah.
Certainly based on race, not that by gender too, as far as pay, that's still a gap. But I just, sometimes I go to an architect and they're designing a brand new building and it's like, hey, wait a minute, the access is way off the back, and it's like we're saying, it's by the dumpster, and
Yeah.
and with all respect, the homeless person, so it might even be dangerous. And then there's the beg button that's as likely to electrocute you as it is to actually work and signify to somebody to go get it. And maybe they're used to ne'er-do-wells ringing the big button, so they just ignore it, even if it does buzz.
And there's something to be said for that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I look at them and I say, with all due respect, I said, you're an inclusive person. I said, would you put a headline in the Miami Herald saying, brand new development or retrofitted historic building, people in Orthodox Jewish garb, please call 2 weeks ahead to schedule, or please, wait and get rained on by the dumpsters, or, Hispanic people need not have the expectation of spontaneity at this restaurant. Please send us a registered letter, and please beg, and please only call when Steve's on duty to usher you through the kitchen and through the stinky garbage, and then we'll take your money for the tomahawk steak. But only then will I would hope to God, as an inclusive society that loves our brethren, we'd all be marching, or it'd be the first thing on the 6 o'clock news or the big Twitter feed saying, oh my God, look at this place, what it does.
Right.
And yet, disability, it's hard to even get the news producer to come out and do that. They just kind of roll their eyes like, well, at least they let them in. And
Wow.
it's like, what do you mean them?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pejorative. There's that word ableism that's a fairly new word, but it sounds like racism, and on any given day it can be as toxic and hurtful and detrimental.
Yeah, all you could do is take that word disabled out of that sentence and put in any other group, and
Yeah.
and people would just be completely outraged.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so Meg, I know that do you guys? I love the fact that the both of you probably do a lot of advocacy work as well.
Yeah.
On behalf of people with different abilities. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. And we try to give people and I'm going back a few points to the coffee shop example, because we tell everybody accessibility and inclusion is not a facilities issue. It's not a building maintenance issue. Everyone has a responsibility to it.
Good point.
Everyone in your company needs to know the accessibility features, how to access them, where they are, where are the accessible parking places in your building. Most people don't know that. How many do you have? How do you reserve one? If your team has favorite restaurants that you go out to, or you're a recruiter and you take people out to lunch, what are the 10 restaurants in your 5-mile radius that are truly accessible? And have that list handy. A lot of times that you're in a Zoom meeting like this, you're interviewing a candidate, you don't know their wheelchair user, they didn't tell you, they show up, they called accessible transportation. Well, now their meetings ran long, they need another pickup.
Right.
Does anybody know where to call? Does anybody know how to access that? So just thinking about the day-to-day logistics and thinking about people with disabilities and how to make sure that they're included, that you're not going to that coffee shop that has 4 steps down and you got to go in the back. We see this being an activity that employee resource groups for people with disabilities will do.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go. Let's send a couple of people out. Or when you go to your next restaurant, eyeball these 5 things. Is a 2-inch step makes it inaccessible for someone in a wheelchair or someone with a walker or other mobility issues. So really having that list and, having them at your home too, of knowing, if you have a party or a friend shows up and, you didn't realize they had an injury and now they're on crutches or whatever, So we try to give folks really thinking about access and inclusion as part of the day-to-day and how you would any other team event, that accessibility should be a part of it, whether it's just going out to lunch, interviewing a new candidate. This one company that we worked with, they would welcome somebody at the main level, and then their interview rooms were on the second floor. They had this beautiful spiral staircase that went right up.
Hmm.
But it was an older building that had been retrofitted, and the elevators were a quarter of a mile down the hallway. So no one thought about that, So now everybody's got to walk a little farther. This makes it extra time. Now they're going to be late for their first interview because they had to take the 10 minutes to roll down the hallway, being escorted by somebody else, and go another quarter of a mile back.
Right.
So thinking about those practical things of, candidates with a disability, and not even, somebody in a wheelchair, they actually can move pretty quickly. But what if it's someone with cerebral palsy?
Right. Right.
Or someone, with Parkinson's
Oh, yeah.
that maybe can't move as quickly or has more difficulty.
Yeah.
But still walking,
Pulmonary issues.
pulmonary issues, right?
Right.
Do you guys know, I'm sitting here every time I'm listening to the two of you talk. I know that there's the WELL AP for buildings. And as you mentioned, Steve, the LEED, right? That's sustainability. It's about air quality. WELL takes it a step further.
Mm.
But is there any other design measures that people...
This is what we need to create, Steve.
We do. I know we do.
I was gonna say we gotta go create it. We could go create it just because I don't have enough on my plate, but I think we could.
No, there obviously maybe there's a little bit of cynicism with the U.S. Green Building Council and how it's kind of propagates and gotten so huge. But no, now resilience is just a for granted. Those giant teacher funds that build or buy those buildings in Manhattan, they want the thing to be LEED Gold or better. They don't want to touch it without that. It went from a what's that, or is that just something for nerds, or is that something Brad Pitt mentioned in New Orleans after Katrina?
Right.
To it's mainstream. It's as mainstream as having air conditioning and a parking deck, So
Right.
no, we need that. We need that.
Well, I even say it's that now is baked in, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, has now come since then. Trauma-informed design, which I'm a part of, will be coming in right after that. It's a changing field for sure.
Right. Right.
We need some certified universal design quest
Checklist, right?
that architects.
We need a triumvirate of
an understanding and process. That's the other part.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you actually have an independent body, and you can have your ceremony and put up your little cornerstone that says it. It should be a thing, it should be like getting 4 diamonds from the AAA or something. It's a pride thing.
Right.
Now, I'm not a rich man because I probably kill half my potential clients by telling them what they did wrong. And if they don't want to move towards heaven, they don't get, I don't work with them. But,
Well, you're still surviving, Steve, so right?
Yeah, life is very good, and I don't need Bill Gates' lifestyle.
Yeah.
But anyhow, no, but just, to maybe end from my point on a positive, because when you point out what's wrong, sometimes it comes off as negative.
Right.
And again, I've always been a person, wanting to see all different people or that wealth of diversity was just something that seemed natural to me, and it's just grown. I've been fortunate enough to work with creatives that have felt that way. Not that the whole world, we're in a very polarized world, certainly as we live in, but not to overly do it, but to go back to that race-based thing. First, we introduced the negativity, but
Yeah.
you can all tell me I'm handsome and look 38 or something, but I roll 60 next year, so that means I'm old enough to remember when, very unfortunately, some architects might have said, "Oh, this person's African American, and they're top of their class from a very good school, but they will probably be a glorified draftsperson because I'm not sure if my clients are ready to see a person of color closing the deal or managing the project."
Right.
Or again, maybe it's terrible for me to say as a male, but I certainly know, even at the newspaper I worked at, there were city editors and managing editors that they would not give the most prime beat to a woman because there was all these stereotypes of, oh, as soon as we get her trained to cover City Hall, she'll have a kid.
Right.
Or, there'll be this time that she's under the weather, and that'll be right when we are fighting with the other crosstown paper or the news to break it. Just terrible pejorative. But lo and behold, some of those women who maybe took the crappier beat and worked through it became the publisher or the managing editor.
Right.
That case that I happen to know with a small architecture firm, when I thought maybe that was what I would do instead of criticizing and writing about it because I can't do the math, or the building would fall down if I were at the switch. I happen to know a small firm in my native Akron, Ohio, where the black person who the hiring manager knew was super bright but was a little bit trepidatious about, can they carry the water? Not only did they become the rainmaker for the firm, but they bought out the founder of the firm. He's just getting ready to sell the business for a very tidy profit that will send his grandkids to the best schools, but, go off and do foundation work, so they will probably sell it to a rival firm for a tidy. So, and I think the parallel, obviously, is with people with disabilities. Not that there aren't already, but I truly think, and this is more Meg's thing for me to shut up and pass the torch, but I think there's people that are entry level, they're run of the mill, they're a cog, and I think they should be at that C-suite with the right training, the right accommodations, feeling comfortable asking for what they need.
Right.
I just read a story that Publix is the big grocery chain in all of Florida, and
Right.
I think they're naming a new CEO or whatever, and they started as basically like a checkout bag boy, and they moved up. So, maybe you didn't come out of the Ivy League, but you worked away. And I think we're probably maybe 30 years behind in that compared to other marginalized groups.
That's right.
As far as recognizing the strength, the problem solving, it's not like, oh, I hired 2 people, I can go to heaven now, I did my charitable act. It's not a charitable act. It's this makes good business. So with that, I will pass the 440 relay torch over to my friend and colleague, Meg.
I'll happily take the baton. So, I guess the only other thing that I would say is that, we are seeing pockets of change when we think about accessibility inclusion. And earlier this year, Lowe's, the home improvement store, and AARP teamed up to start featuring accessibility products and how you could do that within your home, whether it's, shelves that you can pull down. So if you're in a seated position, you don't have to worry about either not being able to reach it or even standing on a step stool, which as we all age, that gets harder to do, right? So we're seeing, big companies start to focus on access and inclusion, and we're seeing hiring initiatives. Michael's is one of my clients, and I was on a call with them earlier today. We're in our 3rd year with them. They've hired over 350 people, and they were saying, we have these 2 guys that are twins with autism in one of our warehouses. They've been working there for 4 years. Both are now in leadership positions where everybody thought, no way, they're lucky to have a job, and now they're leading teams. And so we see real examples of when companies step into this realm and really enter into it with a and yes mindset of how do we do this and what's the next thing we should be thinking about, that they're seeing huge successes.
Right.
Right.
And making a lot of money off of accessibility inclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, they left so much money on the table.
Yes.
And that was the crazy part. And I just want to throw out a little thing out to the universe right now. If Lowe's wants to talk to me about making designer grab bars, I'm more than open to start that part of my design empire.
Excellent.
So, because it's so important. I haven't seen any really great grab bars lately, but like when I do see them, I post them and I say crazy, sexy, cool grab bars.
Right.
It's to get people used to and to think of what grab bars are and how they can see them as opposed to granny bars. Right. And this institutional kind of look, we can make them beautiful and gorgeous, just like we talked about with homes.
Right.
And just have them be, fit into your decor and not look, again, like these institutional pieces.
Right. There is a company out of the UK, I'll think of the name in a minute, and it was started by a gentleman who had an accident.
Motion Spot.
Yes, Motion Spot.
Oh, wow.
I knew it started with an M, and I was like, I just need a minute. It'll happen. Yes.
Yeah, we interviewed them.
So you know the story. It's an amazing story.
It's an amazing story, and they've been doing such an incredible job too. They take, the idea, the aesthetic, and the functionality, and
Design and function meet.
meat, right? And so, just so again, if you're listening, it will be on the website inclusivedesigners.com, and we will post that episode again, as well as the information for Motion Spot.
Excellent.
And Ponte Gallo is another just grab bar group that's an Italian company, but it's also here in the United States.
Right.
And they're also another one of my favorites to have. Again, beautiful, accessible bathrooms that, buck the old idea of what inclusive bathrooms should look like. So, but yeah, I know I'm keeping an eye on the time, Steve. Don't you worry about it. So, is there any last minute? Did you want to finish up your conversation, Meg, on Motion Spot, or did you want to?
No, I was actually just bringing them up because you were talking about your grab bars and thought that they would be a great resource for you, because I know they're doing a lot in office buildings and hotels and all of those places. And that's another thing that we're seeing, right? Is that there are so many companies like this popping up that slowly, and it will be very slowly, but change happens slowly. And with companies like Motion Spot and others that are teaching companies what they need to be doing and how to do it, the more we see it in the mainstream, the better it's going to be for all of us.
Yeah, when we talk to them, and this is important for our listeners to understand, which is that it was a hotel. I know it was the Brooklyn Hotel. I remember that because I come from Brooklyn. Shout out to Brooklyn. And the Brooklyn Hotel was in UK, and they had made it an accessible building, period. It wasn't just one or two rooms in this hotel, it was everything. Everyone had the same room that was all accessible, and their bottom line, I want to say, went up.
Yeah.
But I know that their profits had increased as a result of that. And that, to me, I mean, if that doesn't say it all,
Right.
Right. I don't know what does.
Well, and
Oh, go ahead, Meg.
look at the accessible fashion industry. This was not
A thing.
even happening 10 years ago.
Right.
It was still medical grade clothing that you would never wear outside, that looked like a hospital gown with straps on it. And you had Runway of Dreams teaming up with Tommy Hilfiger.
Yeah.
And now you've got Target and Kohl's and Macy's, and Isaac Mizrahi's now coming out with a line. So in 10 years that movement started, that is a $400 billion industry.
Billion. Yeah.
I know.
So we tell companies all the time that we work, if you're looking for your next innovation, talk to your employees with disabilities.
Yeah.
Because they can tell you what problems need to be solved that no one's paying attention to.
Yep.
And that's such a perfect example to talk about. It's not just about inclusion, it's about being disability competitive.
I love that.
Because if you're competitive in whatever your industry is and market, people with disabilities are going to choose you over your competitors. And that's what you want. Everyone wants the market share, and people with disabilities go and their families shop. It's a $15 trillion market opportunity. So it's just silly if companies, buildings, organizations are not thinking about access and inclusion.
I just enjoy talking to you guys so much. I always enjoy talking. I call it my peeps, right? Right. Our audience's peeps, right? We really do enjoy it. I just want to give you guys a couple of minutes if there's anything else that you feel like you want to add to the conversation, or that we missed, overlooked, or we felt like we just didn't get in. Steve, I'll let you go first.
I don't know. I mean, that last thing, Meg hit that. I mean,
I know. She kind of knocked it out of the ballpark at that point. Yeah.
She really did. That was just like one of those grand slam home run, clear the bags at Fenway, go home.
She did. I was like, all right, well, now we've said everything. We might want to put it at the beginning, cut it down to 5 minutes and call it a day. That's right.
I guess the only other thing I would say that maybe we did is just, I do a little bit of stuff with ARP, and I'm old enough to be the member or whatever now, but, it's just, I remember when they kind of started, it was all these save Social Security, save Medicare, lobby Congress, and now every magazine, along with some celebrity that looks 15 years younger than their actual age, there's all these stories about nerdy stuff about placemaking and inclusive parks and aging in place and how to retrofit your house cheaply. So clearly there's a market there.
Right.
Whatever, probably half the Madison Avenue advertising I see says, 60's the new 40. And I get it, but BS. If I pull an all-nighter for a client, I feel like I got the flu the next day. And I'm guessing most of the folks do. And if I go out and play soccer and wrench my knee, it feels like a 20-year-old would probably just
walk it off
and go home.
Right.
And I'm like, should I go to an urgent care?
Urgent care.
But, no, the point being, what is it? Something like 10,000 people reach retirement age every day in America, and that number is just going to go up.
Yeah, it's this silver tsunami. It's already here. We haven't hit the top of the crest yet. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, with all due respect, the kids coming out with a master's degree have $300,000 in student loans and are moving into a micro unit, especially if they want to live in a top tier city.
Right.
And it's the silver tsunami who has the money to invest. So as Meg was saying, if your bagelry has better bagels than Manhattan, if your croissant place outdoes Paris, how am I going to know if I only go to places that are accessible?
Yeah.
Because that's the way I vote with my feet. I'm kind of a social media addict. I don't TikTok, but I do all the other platforms. If somebody burns a pizza, 1,000 of my close personal friends know, and they tell their friends. If they make the croissant that's half the price of Paris and I don't have to go fly into the Gaulle, I tell people, again, I don't think this is just doing the right thing. I think there is a killing to be made with this.
Yeah.
Everyone on this call is old enough to remember, bottled water, it comes out of the spigot. Who would pay for that? Ha ha.
Right. Right.
I mean, money isn't everything, but don't I wish my dad would have somehow put his money into bottled, even if we own 1/1000th of the bottled water market, I'd be, I would have had time to learn 5 languages and cure cancer or something in my spare hours,
Well, you're doing an incredible job being an advocate.
Yeah.
But Meg, you said, what is it? It's a $15 trillion business. Is that overall?
Yes, that's globally.
Globally.
It's a $15 trillion market opportunity.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like 250 million in the US alone.
Mm.
So really, if you're not thinking about people with disabilities, you're really missing an opportunity.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a great way to end it. Listen, thank you so much both for being here, and keep up the good work, and we'll be in touch when we create our universal plan.
I love it. Let's do it.
I know.
Ooh, great.
I know.
I'm in on it, right? And I have a team. We can work this. We just need to get some funding and stuff like that. I'm in. And thank you for all the work that you guys do.
Well, thanks for having us and inviting us on. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, very much a pleasure.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
I love how Meg is helping companies be accessible to all people of different abilities, including design and policies which help promote productivity, even helping those that have dyslexia to make the workplace accommodating. And we need to remember that the wheelchair is not the only disability.
As Meg said about accessibility, it's not a facilities issue, a building issue, or a maintenance issue. Everyone has a responsibility to it.
And Steve made some very good points too. He is so right that design that separates someone with a disability from their coworkers can make them feel inferior. I agree that we all need to design for dignity. We want environments that work for everybody and that don't need special considerations or accommodations because they're already built into the environment.
So you're saying Stephen Wright was right?
Really? Funny, but it's true.
I couldn't resist. But you're not wrong.
Nope.
But seriously, when Steve talks about urban planning, it's getting around in our cities and streets. And for Meg, it's access in buildings where people are employed. They both encourage using universal design concepts to ensure spaces that are open and available to everyone.
The pandemic created a paradigm change in the workforce, but we know disability inclusion in the workplace is a $15 trillion global industry, a lucrative opportunity that many companies are leaving on the table, with $250 million in America alone. I have got to help them create these new design measures as we discussed. I'm so busy, but I think it would be great. A quest, if you will, a checklist along with process and understanding.
And it sounds like you already have the right team to get it started. And to our listeners, stay tuned for updates on this.
Absolutely. And we will share the link on how to contact Steve and Meg, and of course, the links to all the work they are doing and all the many other things mentioned along the way during this discussion, all on our website at inclusivedesigners.com.
That's inclusivedesigners.com.
A big thank you to Steve and Meg, and of course, to all of you for listening.
Along with all the regular places you get your podcasts, such as Apple, Google, Spotify, and Pandora, you can also find us on YouTube as, you guessed it, Inclusive Designers Podcast. And of course, if you like what you hear, feel free to go to our website and hit that Patreon button or the link to our GoFundMe page.
Yes, please do. And let us know if you have any questions or suggestions for topics you think we should be covering in upcoming shows. And as our motto says, stay well and stay well informed. As always, thank you for stopping by. We'll see you next time.
Yes, thanks again.